Hello YouTube, welcome back to another alternate history video. And today I got the 1980 presidential election, which was held between incumbent President Jimmy Carter and Republican challenger, former governor of California, Ronald Reagan. But in this alternate scenario, I got Reagan's running mate, George H.W. Bush, who was the nominee in 1988 and of course was elected vice president under Reagan. And he did run for president in 1980, but of course fell short to Reagan. Well, like I said, in this alternate scenario, I got Bush if he did get the nomination. Now, of course, 1980, Carter's popularity went way down because of the handling of the economy. It didn't get better. Of course, it started getting bad under Nixon and Ford, and Carter was elected to try to bring change, but of course, nothing really changed. Of course, the stagflation was still going on. And then you had the Iran hostage situation, which made Carter's popularity plummet, like I said, and he faced a strong challenge from Ronald Reagan, who just swept the map. It was definitely a landslide for Reagan. But in this alternate scenario, we'll see how Bush could do if he was the nominee. Now, of course, I believe the Mountain West states of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming would go for Bush, as well as Utah, of course. Just a second. I have a little hard time here. All right, there we go. Yeah, like I said, I believe these states would go for Bush, as well as Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, very rural states that didn't go for Carter, as well as Nevada. And I believe Washington, Oregon, and California all go for Bush. Of course, Reagan won them. He was from California. And when Bush actually ran against Dukakis in '88, Dukakis actually did win Washington and Oregon, but of course they were trending blue around that time, and they are today. But I believe with this being 1980 and Carter getting unpopular, I believe they would go for Bush in this case. And as well as Alaska, I believe Hawaii would go for Carter, though he had great support here, always been a Democratic stronghold, as well as Minnesota is Walter Mondale's home state, so I believe it would go for Carter. However, I believe the Dakotas would go for Bush, as well as Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, his home state of Texas. I believe Jimmy would win his home state of Georgia because he did both times. Even in, like I said, 1980, he still won it against Reagan, so I believe he would win it against Bush. However, I believe Bush could win these other southern states like Reagan did. Of course, Carter won them in 1976, but with his popularity going down, and Reagan actually had good rule appeal in these states, I believe Bush could do the same and win Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, as well as Florida. It typically voted for incumbents, but it did go for Reagan in this year because, like I said, definitely had great support in the Panhandle and the rest of Florida. And with Carter's popularity going down, I believe Bush could win it because he did win it in his runs in '88 and '92, as well as South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky. However, I believe West Virginia would go for Carter. It was more of a Democratic stronghold back then, where coal miners typically voted for Democrats. However, I believe Bush would take Indiana as well as Illinois. Of course, Chicago wasn't really as contested back then, and that's how Democratic it's become now, but back then it was more of a Republican state, so I believe it would go Bush in this case. Now, Bush did lose Iowa to the caucus in '88 because the caucus did better with the rural voters in the state, but of course he also had the farming crisis during the Reagan administration. But since this was 1980, the year Reagan was elected, I believe it would go Bush in this case. Because, of course, like I said, the farming crisis didn't happen until after Reagan got into office, but so I believe it would actually go for Georgia in this case, as well as Missouri and Wisconsin, Michigan. Bush and Reagan both had great appeal here with unions and rural workers. Reagan Democrats, I believe they would turn out good for Bush, as well as Ohio had great support here with rural and working class voters. And my home state of Virginia always voted Republican from the '60s up until 2008. So I believe it would go Bush, as well as Pennsylvania. He had good appeal here, as well as did Reagan. Now, Jimmy Carter won New York against Gerald Ford because he had great appeal in NYC. However, with his popularity going down, and I could actually see Bush winning New York like Reagan did in this case, and a close one, but I could actually see it going for Bush, as well as New Hampshire and Vermont, always moderate Republican states back then. Now, Jimmy Carter, I believe, won Massachusetts. Well, let me check actually. For the load. So actually, Reagan actually won Massachusetts in a close contest by a few points. But Bush actually won Massachusetts against Dukakis in 1988. because Bush was actually from Massachusetts. He was from Texas, technically, during this time, but he was also from Massachusetts. That's where he was born. So Texas kind of adopted him. But Bush actually had good appeal in Massachusetts. And it was Dukakis' home state, but obviously lost it, like I said. But Reagan also won Massachusetts, too. So I believe it could go for him. And Rhode Island, I believe, was a Reagan state. Well, actually, no, I think it was Carter. I want to check for sure. So, yeah, so it looks like Rhode Island actually was won by Carter by a pretty solid margin. So it could actually go him in this case, too, against Bush, since Reagan didn't even win it. However, Connecticut was more of a moderate Republican state, so I believe we'll go for Bush, as well as New Jersey and Delaware. And I believe Carter won Maryland. Maybe that was the one I was confusing with. I thought he had won Massachusetts, but I believe it was actually Maryland he had won. And yes, it was. However, I think Bush won Maryland, if I'm not mistaken, in '88, because Carter had better appeal in Baltimore, like the city, but Bush had pretty good appeal in Baltimore County. And the rest of the state, but like I said, Carter had the better appeal in the more populated areas. But Bush actually had pretty good appeal, like I said, in '88, because I believe he won it against Dukakis. But since Carter was able to do pretty good in Baltimore, I believe he could actually hold on to it in this case, since he did win it against Reagan, as well as he would win D.C., of course. And Maine up here, I believe, would go for Bush. Very solid, moderate Republican, just like New Hampshire and Vermont back then. So here's my final map. It is the exact map as 1980. Bush winning 489 to Carter's 49. Now, you could say Bush could win Maryland since he did against Dukakis, but I believe that'd probably be about the only one that would flip in this case, because I think all the other states I gave to Carter would go for him. Like I said, Maryland's about the one I could actually see flipping to Bush, and if he were to win it, that would give him 499 electoral votes. But I think since Carter had better appeal in Baltimore, I think he could hold on to it in this case, and that does give it the exact map. Like I said, in 1980, Reagan won it 49 to 49, and so would Bush in this case, according to this prediction of mine. But if you have a different thought, if you disagree, just comment below. I thank you for watching. Subscribe and hit the bell for notifications if you haven't, and I'll see you next time.